Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and a very good day to Dr. Hasniza. We are from Group 2. We are presenting about country risk analysis and the country that we use are Russia. My name is SITI SYAFIQAH binti RAFIE with the metric number 278739. We are in Group 5 member. Russia is a democracy country since Boris Yeltsin election in 1991. In this report, we are focusing more on analyzing the year 2020 in every risk such as political risk, economic risk, financial risk, social risk, and also environmental risk. There are two ways of calculation, which is normalization and also changes in percentages. At the end of this report, we are getting the overall risk of Russia by assigning weight to each risk. The next one, I would like to present about the political risk. Based on Green in 1974 and Tunnel 1977, political risk in the host nation was largely linked with political instability and dramatic changes in politics. There are four indicators in this political risk, which is government integrity, political violence, human rights, and also corruption. Based on Rothstein and NURUL 2008, the government integrity is directly connected to government quality. Based on the graph, there is a significant increase that shows that Russia is in a high risk of government integrity. The risk rating is 100 out of 100 using normalized approach. In 2020, there are an indiscriminate attacks on civilians and propaganda of war that is lead to the hatred of people to the nation. The next one is political violence. The risk rating of political violence is 35 over 100. We are using the percentage of changes approach. It shows that Russia suffered moderate political violence risk compared to 2018 and 2019. In 2020, the Russia commit genocide, which is killing a large number of people during its invasion and military assault. Next one is human rights. The risk rating for human rights is 86 over 100 and it is quite high. Human rights in Russia refers to the basic freedoms and rights that are guaranteed by the country. In 2020, according to the Human Rights Organization, Russia purposely targeted civilian infrastructure in the metropolitan areas. Even though we see that the graph shows the declining, but the risk is still high in the human risk. The last indicator is corruption. Based on Moiseev and procurators in 2014, oligarchic organization of Russia deploy corruption schemes to influence decision made at all levels of official power. The risk rating of corruption is 100 out of 100. The most crucial element in 2020 is government integrity with a weight of 0.35. It is due because of direct or indiscriminate attacks on individuals which are persecuted. The government credibility also might be undermined when there is a propaganda of war in Russia. It is followed by the corruption, which has weight 0.3. The corruption has also in the economic growth of Russia and it slowed the Russian economic growth, with the poorest citizens being deprived of their rights. Next, the human rights contain the weight of 0.25. The human rights is an important indication of Russian government integrity and also corruption. However, political violence is prevalent in Russia, which is weight on 0.1. At the end of the assigning weight, we get the overall political risk which is 90. Russia's political risk is the greatest among the ordinary risks.
Next is economy risk. The indicator used to measure about economy risk for Russia is gross domestic product, GDP growth, unemployment rate, inflation rate, and oil price volatility. For GDP growth, a severe worldwide recession brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic is expected to cause Russia's GDP growth in 2020 to decrease by 6%, an 11-year low. We set an assumption of minimum GDP value and get the risk score of 19 out of 100. Next, unemployment rate has reached 6.3% in October 2020, which is the highest rate in 8 years of unemployment. By calculation and compared to other years, the unemployment rate has a high risk score of 85 out of 100 by using a standard minimum rate of 5%. At the end of 2020, the inflation rate was 4.9%, which was more than the inflation target set by the Russian Central Bank due to COVID-19. We rate the inflation rate risk score to be 45 out of 100 by using average risk score for each month with a minimum inflation rate of 4%. Furthermore, oil price fell sharply because of the larger demand shock brought on by the COVID-19 epidemic. The risk score is 65 out of 100, which is moderate due to only a few months of below average price. The factor GDP growth become the higher rate as 0.3 because GDP is a crucial indication of the economic success. Next, factor unemployment rate is rated as 0.2 since unemployment rate provides insight into the economy remaining asset and spare capacity. Furthermore, factor inflation rate also weighted as 0.2 due to inflation has an effect on every aspect of the economy. Oil price fluctuation can create uncertainty and provide difficulty for stable economic planning. So we rate factor oil price volatility as 0.3. The risk score for economic risk is 72.5.
Now I'll be presenting on the financial risk. So financial risk is the possibility of financial loss resulting from the ambitious and unexpected developments in the financial market. 4 indicators will be included in the financial risk for Russia, which is exchange rate, foreign reserve, stock market performance, and banking sector stability. Any significant depreciation of Russian ruble against USD indicates financial instability. So the exchange rate rating of Russian ruble against USD is 60%, which shows moderate exposure towards fluctuations and potential risks, mainly to the disrupted COVID-19 outbreak, Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the US election. Next indicator will be the stock market performance MOEX. The index is the MOEX Russia Index MICEX, which serves as a benchmark to evaluate the overall efficiency. The stock market performance rating will be 50%, which there are 2 drops of instability in March October 2020. Mainly is because of the Saudi Arabia initiated the oil price war with Russia throughout the pandemic, and another will be the investor choose to hold cash during US presidential election. Next will be the international reserves, and the main objective is to manage the external risk and advocate stability. The risk is rated at 30%, which is a relatively very low risk, and this shows that Russia is more capable to resist economic shocks and uphold financial stability. Lastly will be the broad money entry, and the risk is 50%. There is a rise in money supply growth and foreign rate growth. However, based on the previous years, the expansion of M3 did not really impact the economy negatively. Thus, the money supply risk is financial risk is moderate. On the weightage, the internal reserve will be at the highest at 0.4 because it promotes economic confidence and ensures the stability of the nation's balance of payments. Next will be exchange rate will be at 0.3 because Russia heavily dependent on exports on raw materials like oil and gas. Following on is the broad money with the rate of 0.2, the combination of international reserve and affects the exchange rate. Lastly, with the stock market performance of 0.1 because in 2020 only oil companies were greatly affected. The overall financial risk is 45%, which is lower than average.
Now I will continue with social risk. The first factor for social risk is tourism. The tourism risk rating is approximately 80%. This risk rating is relatively high due to the COVID-19 impact and the war between Ukraine and Russia that happened in 2020. The second factor is crime. The crime rate is relatively high, which is 65%. It is because while Russia's crime rate reduced in 2020 compared to the previous year, the country still faces major crime challenges. Theft, robbery, and assault are the most frequent crimes in Russia. In Russia, theft is the most common crime. The next factor is income. The minimum wage was raised by 9% in comparison to the previous year. The increased minimum wage was designed to benefit low-income workers while also stimulating economic growth. The last factor for social risk is mortality. The risk rating for mortality is 82%. According to the Deputy Prime Minister Tatiana Glikova, more than 80% of the extra deaths in Russia were caused by the pandemic. 337,000 extra deaths have been reported in Russia, which is 25% more than in 2019. The weightage for every indicator is social risk. Tourism is weighted at 0.3, which is the most dominant factor in 2020 due to COVID-19 pandemic. The reduction in economic activity caused by COVID-19 regulations has had a significant impact on several industries, particularly the tourism industry. Next, mortality and crime were weighted at the same weight, 0.25. In 2020, the mortality rate mostly also be affected by COVID-19 with other factors too. The Russian government lacks sufficient funding to successfully combat crime. Other than that, income is weighted at 0.2, the lowest contribution to the social risk. In recent years, the government has prioritized raising the minimum wage. The total social risk, determined by taking into consideration all variables, is 64.7. We can infer that Russia has a social risk that is somewhat higher than average.
Next, I will introduce about the environmental risk, which refers to the likelihood or potential for harm, disease, or death as a result of exposure to a potential environmental hazard. There are a few indicators and factors are used to evaluate the environmental risk for Russia. The first factor is air pollution. The air quality index is 9.3 micrograms per cubic meter in 2020, which has a moderate risk rating of 16% by using the normalization formula. The score is mainly due to the data from ambient air quality monitoring, shows the number of dangerous compounds has significantly decreased. The second factor is water pollution. The graph illustrates that annual wastewater discharge in Russia has gradually decreased, while clean water access has increased at the same time. Maybe due to the reason, Gazprom cooperates with the Novosibirsk Institute of Mining to implement a new water purification system in Russia. Therefore, we can get a low risk rating of 30% in 2020 after we set the assumption in the calculation by using the normalization formula. The third factor, deforestation, a low risk rating of 30% in 2020 is calculated by the normalized formula since the data shows that the forest area covering the land has increased from 2005 to 2020, and the growth may be due to the Russian Climate Fund has taken action and has a 2030 target of 1 billion trees planted. The last factor is climate change. It has a high risk rating of 90%, which is a dangerous situation in the year 2020, calculated by the normalization formula. This is because the rising temperature environment have worsened forest fires in Russia and have an effect on local residents' health. Air pollution and water pollution become the highest rated of 0.3 that affect environmental risks in Russia, since with an estimated 7 million premature deaths each year due to air pollution. However, the pollutants from the river are inevitably absorbed into the human body, deforestation and climate change. Both have the same weight of 0.2, since the high levels of corruption in the government contribute significantly to the continuous loss of the biodiversity. Besides, the higher sea levels, droughts, and decreased crop production are all caused by climate change. In summary, the environmental risk is 51%. Based on the various indicators, it is a median risk for Russia.
Concluding, country risk refers to uncertainties that businesses, investors, and organizations encounter when making investment in a certain country. In 2020, three main activities that greatly affect the country risk of Russia, which is the oil price, the pandemic, and the Ukraine war, whereby economical, political, and financial sector were greatly affected. Thus, the weight of these three sectors will be 0.35, 0.25, and 0.2 respectively. Social risk raised at 0.1, which is mainly affected by the factor of mortality by the pandemic. Lastly is the environmental risk, which is also 0.1 because pollution in Russia may not seem to be the main issue in 2020, but is still a continuing issue in the long term. Thus, the overall risk in Russia in these five factors is 63.345.